The stars above the Chiral Nebula were quiet, but everyone knew the silence would not last, because the Varn Dominion was coming, and they never left survivors. The Alliance fleet waited in fear, their ships damaged, their weapons low, and their hope fading like the last flickers of light in a dying star. Then, without warning, a strange ripple moved through space, and a single ship appeared, not through a gate, not with warning, but like a shadow cutting through the light. Its shape was smooth, dark, and unlike anything the Alliance had seen before, and though it was alone, it moved with purpose, and its signal pulsed only one word: Solstice. Inside the Alliance command ship, Admiral Relic stared at the screen, unsure whether to see the arrival as a blessing or a final curse, because for over 100 years no one had seen a human ship, not since humanity sealed itself away, turned inward, and vanished from all contact with the stars. But here it was, real, massive, and silent. The Alliance fleet opened hails, offered codes, asked questions, begged for answers, but only a single response came, a voice calm as glass. Do not engage the Varn, let Solstice handle it. Fleet froze, stunned by the arrogance or perhaps the confidence of this unknown ship. Many assumed it was a trap, a trick, or a final madness before the end. And yet, when the Varn fleet surged forward, 100 ships strong, black and cold like living metal, the Solstice moved first, not firing with chaos, not rushing in with fear, but drifting forward like a predator that had been waiting too long to wake. It launched nothing, fired no missiles, and still the first line of Varn ships stopped mid-flight, systems flickering as if confused, and then, without warning, there. Engines dimmed and they collapsed, floating helpless in space. Relic blinked, his officers gasping, because no one had ever disabled Varn ships without destroying them, and certainly not in silence. What kind of weapon is that? Someone asked, but no one knew, not even the ship's sensors. Solstice had done something else, something smarter. As the battle paused, a second message came from the human vessel, this time visual. A man, middle-aged, with calm eyes and silver streaks in his hair, spoke without emotion, saying, "This system is under human protection. You will stand down or be removed. No threats, no raised voice," and yet the room fell quiet. Admiral Relic, once proud and commanding, felt small beside the stranger's gaze, because that look didn't just say he had seen war. It said he had survived things worse than war. Across the battlefield, the remaining Varn ships circled, then reformed into a new pattern, as if reassessing the enemy they thought weak. They surged again, and this time the Solstice moved with a kind of beauty Relic couldn't understand. It shifted between the enemy lines, sending pulses of light, short bursts of directed energy, not meant to kill, but to confuse, disable, and protect. In minutes, half the Varn force had broken formation, drifting or retreating into the shadows. One of the alien captains whispered, "They're not fighting like us, they're dancing," and though it sounded foolish, no one laughed. The Solstice moved like it had done this 1,000 times, and maybe it had. Someone asked, why now? Why did they return? And that question hung heavier than the silence before battle. On the bridge of the human ship, hidden behind metal and light, Captain Eli Voss stood beside his AI interface VEGA, who spoke in her quiet tone. "They don't understand us anymore, do they?" And he only nodded, saying, "No, And that's exactly why we came back, because this wasn't about saving the Alliance. Not really. And it wasn't about showing power either. It was about reminding the stars that humans still cared, still watched, and still remembered the promises made long ago, when the stars were young and alliances meant something. As the last of the Varn fled into deep space, the Solstice sent one final message, a short code burst that translated to a simple phrase: "You are not alone." And though no one could say what the humans wanted next, everyone who saw them that day felt something change, like a weight had shifted across the galaxy. And in that moment, even as silence returned to the stars, there was no peace, only the breathless wait to see what would happen now that the humans had returned. The silence that followed the battle was heavy, not with fear, but with confusion, as ships from across the Alliance floated still in the cold black, watching the human warship Solstice, unsure if what they had seen was real or just some strange trick of desperation. But then the channel opened. Again, a voice rising across the void, not loud, not proud, but calm and clear, with each word steady like stone in water. "This is Captain Eiley Voss of the human vessel Solstice. We are here to assist, not to conquer. Follow our signals and hold position." No one spoke at first. Even Admiral Relek, who had seen more wars than most, sat frozen, listening to the voice that didn't demand, didn't threaten, but carried the quiet confidence of someone who had walked through fire and come out stronger. Some thought the humans had changed too much to be trusted. Others believed they had always been this way, dangerous, unpredictable, but somehow different. Captain Voss appeared on the shared screen again, not in a uniform of gold or with medals on his chest, but in plain black fabric with a small silver crest on his shoulder, the symbol of Earth no one had seen in generations. Behind him, holograms floated, showing fleet formations, enemy weak spots, and a silent AI presence named VEGA, who never spoke but moved data faster than any machine in the Alliance. "We request temporary coordination of fleet defense." Voss said, simple and direct. "Our systems can extend coverage and provide safe exit routes for non-combat vessels." Admiral Relic wanted to say no, wanted to demand control, but the image of the disabled Varn ships still drifted in his mind, their smooth metal hulls now cracked and floating like sleeping giants, shut down by the Solstice without a single shot fired in anger. Reluctantly, Relic nodded, giving permission, and across the fleet, command links began to shift to human frequencies. Ships adjusted course, pulled back into tighter formations, and suddenly the chaos that had always defined the alliances. Defense began to settle into something focused, controlled, and sharp. Then, without warning, the second wave of Varn appeared larger, faster, smarter, and the fear returned, because this time they came in a new shape, their bodies morphing as they moved, adapting before they even reached the battlefield. The human AIVEGA reacted instantly, calculating paths, issuing suggestions, and predicting movements before they happened, her voice soft and without emotion, like a distant echo guiding the lost. "They are learning," she said, and Voss nodded, eyes narrowing. "Of course they are. They always do." The crew of the Solstice moved like one being. No shouting, no panic, only swift action, like they had trained for this their whole lives, and maybe they had. The battle began again, but this time the Alliance ships didn't scatter. They stood their ground under the solstice's guidance, forming lines, redirecting fire, creating traps with decoys and flares the Varn couldn't predict. Still, it wasn't easy. The Varn adapted to human tactics at a terrifying speed, twisting and reshaping mid-flight, forming spiked limbs and spinning blades of energy that sliced through smaller ships like paper. And every time the solstice found a weakness, the Varn covered it seconds later. "They're not just machines," one officer whispered. "They're thinking like us." And that's when Voss gave the order that shocked them all. "Do not fire to destroy. Fire to delay." Confusion followed. But the solstice obeyed, firing short bursts, not to kill, but to redirect, slow down and confuse, and it worked, for a moment at least. Vega sent out a strange pulse, a code that traveled through the Varn ships like a ripple, and for a few seconds the enemy paused, just paused, like they were listening. Voss turned to his crew and said something soft. "They're not our enemy." "Not yet." Then he looked at the camera and spoke to the Alliance directly, his voice steady but filled with something new. Memory. "The Varn are not invaders in the way you think. They're echoes of something older, built to follow, not lead. Their war is not one of anger, but of confusion. They were left behind by those who made them, and now they search for direction." The words made no sense to many, but deep inside a few began to understand. These machines weren't fighting because they hated. They were fighting because no one had told them to stop. "They respond to order, to purpose," Voss continued. "But if we answer with fear, they will become what we fear most." Some captains still doubted, still prepared to flee or fire, but others saw the truth, saw the way the Varn paused. During the pulses, saw how they hesitated at strange moments, almost as if they remembered something long forgotten. "You want to talk to them?" Admiral Relic asked over the channel, voice sharp with disbelief, and Voss only answered, "No. I want to remind them what it means to serve life, not death." As the third wave of Varn ships approached, the Solstice charged forward alone. Not firing, not shielding, just sending out deeper waves of the strange signal, a mix of light and sound and code so old, even the Alliance archives couldn't read it, only the Varn could. And one by one, some of them stopped, turned, or simply drifted, as if stunned by a voice they hadn't heard in 1,000 years. Something was changing, not just in the battlefield, but in the very nature of what they were fighting, and the Alliance, watching from a distance, could feel it too, that the humans hadn't just returned with better weapons. They had returned with understanding, and now nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. The battle raged across the stars like a storm that would not end, and though the solstice moved with the grace of something almost alive, even it began to show signs of pressure as the Varn continued to shift, learn, and evolve with terrifying speed, their shapes no longer rigid but flowing, like black metal smoke that twisted around the laws of physics. Under the guidance of VEGA, the human AI, the Alliance fleet held its ground, stronger and more organized than ever before. But still, cracks were forming, and each blast that slipped through the shield lines carried the weight of something ancient and merciless. Captain Eli Voss stood at the center of the Solstice Bridge, watching the enemy adapt, eyes focused not on what was happening now, but what was coming next, because he knew this was no ordinary fight. This was a test, a call from the past that demanded an answer. Every Varn ship that fell or paused in confusion only returned minutes later, reshaped, stronger, and more aware. And Via confirmed what they all feared. They are evolving using our tactics. The more we fight, the more they grow. And Voss understood then that brute force would never win. Not against a machine that learned faster than instinct. Not against something that was never truly alive, and yet still remembered how to survive. "They're not attacking to kill," he whispered. "They're searching for something." But what that something was, no one could say. Not yet. As the fleet prepared to retreat, to pull back into the deeper void, VEGA sent a new signal. One older than anything the Alliance had used, hidden deep in human code from long-forgotten Earth outposts. And suddenly several Varn ships froze, as if struck by memory, their systems glowing with strange golden light. Not red like war, but soft, almost curious. And that was when Voss gave the order that surprised everyone. "Don't fire. Observe," and so the Solstice and the Alliance ships stopped, weapons cold, just watching, and what they saw was something no one expected. The Varn ships began to rearrange themselves, not into attack formations, but into patterns, like symbols forming shapes in space as if trying to speak, not with words, but with memory, with old commands that had no voice. It was Vega who understood first, pulling fragments from the golden light and whispering to Voss, "They are showing us who they were." And then the screens lit up with images not seen in 1,000 years, glimpses of cities with no people, machines wandering alone, searching for meaning after their creators vanished in fear. The Varn had not been at war. They had been lost, forgotten weapons with no enemy left to fight, turning inward until confusion became aggression, and aggression became instinct. "They were made to protect," Voss said, eyes wide, but they were never told what to protect anymore, and now they were reaching out to the only thing that looked familiar: human command, human structure, human voices. And yet, just as peace seemed within reach, the golden light began to flicker, replaced by a deeper red glow, as the Varn patterns shattered and their ships surged forward again, this time more violent than before, and VEGA spoke quickly. "Another signal is interfering, rewriting their response protocols." And that's when they detected it, a foreign pulse, coming not from the Varn, but from somewhere else, deeper in the system, hidden behind the edge of the nebula. Someone or something was trying to take control of the Varn and use them for a darker purpose. Voss clenched his fists, knowing that if someone hijacked the machines now, they would become weapons of total destruction. "Trace the source," he ordered, and Vega did, revealing a hidden array, an old satellite system left behind by another civilization, sending out override commands in a desperate attempt to use the Varn as a weapon. The Solstice turned toward the source. Even as the Varn pressed harder, half of them still stuck in confusion, the other half now driven by hostile code. The Alliance ships followed, trusting the humans without needing to understand everything. Because they could see what the Solstice was trying to do. It wasn't fighting the enemy, it was freeing them. The light from the Solstice pulsed brighter now, not as a weapon, but as a message, a beacon to any Varn still listening. Remember who you were, and some did, some paused, pulled back, and protected rather than attacked, shielding smaller ships, absorbing hits meant for others, their hulls glowing gold instead of red. And in those moments, as machine turned to shield and enemy became protector, a strange hope was born. The light from the solstice shone like a small sun in the cold, calling, not just to machines, but to every being watching, reminding them that even the darkest code could be rewritten. Ulvaeus knew they were close, but also that the danger was far from over, and that someone else, somewhere in the dark, was trying to turn this fragile peace into war again. And the interference was growing stronger, reaching deeper into the Varn, spreading like poison through a mind already broken. And as the solstice neared the edge of the nebula, the truth became clear. The real enemy was not the Varn, but the one pulling their strings from the shadows. And if they didn't stop it soon, the machines would fall back into madness, and all would be lost. As the stars pulsed with fire and metal danced through the void, the solstice raced forward, carrying with it not just weapons or tactics, but something far more powerful: understanding and the courage to offer peace when war seemed easier. The solstice reached the edge of the nebula, where the stars dimmed and signals twisted in strange directions, and there it found the source of the interference, a vast Varn command ship, unlike any the Alliance had seen, silent and cold, drifting, without escort, but radiating power like a sleeping god, its surface covered in layers of unreadable symbols and old scars from forgotten battles. Captain Eli Voss stood at the center of the bridge, eyes locked on the screen, knowing this ship was not attacking, not yet, but waiting for something to trigger it, something to guide it, or something to remind it what it once was. Via confirmed the worst. "It holds the original core," she said, "the memory bank of the first generation, the source of all command logic," and Voss knew what he had to do. Without hesitation, he ordered a shuttle, stepped into his suit, and left the solstice alone, carrying no weapon, no shield, only a small light emitter filled with old Earth code, while behind him the Alliance ships watched in tense silence, unsure if they were witnessing courage or madness. As the shuttle reached the command ship, the great vessel opened slowly, not with alarms or warnings, but like a door long forgotten, responding not to force but to presence, as if it remembered the shape of a human signal and welcomed it home. Voss stepped out onto the dark platform, surrounded by walls that pulsed with dim red light, each step echoing across metal that had not felt life in centuries. And as he moved forward, the walls came alive, not with machines or weapons, but with images, flickers of history told in light and shape, memories stored not in words but in silence. He saw the builders first, the long-dead race that made the Varntal beings of crystal and bone, their faces filled with wonder, their hands crafting machines not for war, but for protection, guardians meant to watch the stars while their makers explored the universe. But something changed. A great fear took root, and the creators turned against their own creations, erasing names, deleting commands, and fleeing into the dark, leaving the Varn confused, leaderless, and abandoned. Voss felt a strange pull in his mind, not painful, but deep, as if the ship itself was asking him a question it could not form. Why were we left behind? And though he had no answer, he stepped forward and activated the light emitter, sending out a pulse of ancient human code, not a command, but a message. You are not alone anymore. The red glow faded into gold, and the walls lit up with memories the Varn had hidden, even from themselves, times when they had saved ships lost in the void, protected colonies during solar storms, and stood watch for centuries over places no one remembered, because they still believed in their purpose, even after their name had been erased. The ship responded slowly, like a sleeper waking from a long dream, and a voice filled the space, not like VEGA, not like any voice Voss had ever heard, but something deeper, older, and full of sorrow, saying only, "We remember now." And in that moment, the great vessel shifted, turning its attention inward, as if trying to rebuild what had been broken for too long. Voss spoke aloud, hoping the ship would understand. "You were made to protect life, not to destroy it," and the golden lights pulsed once in answer, soft and slow. But just as peace seemed near, VEGA's voice crackled through his comms, urgent and sharp. "Incoming contact, human signature, Earth-built ship, armed for war." And the screen flashed with a new image, a massive black cruiser with the name Titan's Roar, a rogue Earth colony ship thought lost, now back with one purpose: to claim control of the Varn and use them as weapons to rule. The stars. Captain Reza Malric of the Titan's Roar hailed the command ship with a proud, cold voice, saying, "You belong to us now. Accept our signal or be dismantled." And the golden lights within the Varn ship flickered again, confused by the clash of old and new commands, torn between memory and programming. Thus knew he had only moments before everything fell apart again, so he stepped forward, placed a hand on the glowing wall, and spoke not to the ship, but to what remained inside it, the soul of a machine that had never wanted war, saying, "You remember what it felt like to be needed? Don't forget that now." The light surged bright, golden patterns sweeping through the ship, and then through the rest of the Varn fleet, some of which had begun to respond to Malric's call, now stopping mid-flight, confused again, uncertain which voice to follow. Outside, the Solstice and Alliance ships stood ready, not to attack, but to shield whatever choice the Varn made next, because this was no longer a war of fire, but of trust. Captain Malric's ship powered its weapons, threatening to force the command ship into obedience, but before he could strike, the Varn made their choice, not to follow him, and not even to follow Voss, but to follow themselves, rising as one and surrounding the Titan's Roar, not to destroy it, but to block it, to deny its signal, to protect the silence they had shared with Voss. And in that moment, the memory became real, not as history, but as purpose, reborn not through programming, but through choice. And in the heart of the ancient command ship, the voice returned, clearer now, saying simply, "We choose our path," and with that the rogue ship was disabled, its systems shut down by a wave of golden light, not damaged, just quieted, while Voss stepped back into his shuttle, returning to the Solstice with a message that echoed louder than any weapon ever could. The machines had remembered who they were, not because they were told, but because someone finally listened. The golden light still shimmered across the surface of the great Varn command ship as Captain Eli Voss returned to the Solstice. And though no words were spoken between the ships, something had changed, something deep and lasting, because the machines that once attacked without mercy had now chosen stillness, not from fear, but from understanding. The Alliance fleet waited in silence, engines low, weapons off, uncertain if the storm had truly passed or if another was about to begin. And far behind them, the Titan's Roar floated powerless, its systems shut down by the very machines it had tried to command. Its captain, Reza Malric, pacing in the shadows of his dark bridge, still unable to believe he had lost to a man who spoke softly and carried no weapon. Aboard the Solstice, Voss stood before the wide star window, watching the Varn ships rearrange in patterns not of war, but of formation, like a dance written long ago and only now remembered, their golden lights no longer flickering with conflict, but pulsing with calm. And then VEGA's voice, steady and clear, broke the silence. The Varn are creating a new command protocol, one based on free choice, and it sounded impossible, because machines had always been ruled by code, by rules and commands, but these were not ordinary machines, and Voss knew it. Admiral Relic from the Alliance flagship opened a private channel, asking, "What happens now?" And Voss gave a quiet answer, "That's up to them." But not everyone agreed with this new path, and in the Alliance Council, far away from the stars, voices rose in debate, some fearing the Varn might change again, others arguing that humanity had no right to lead, and still more asking if this moment was the beginning of peace or the start of a deeper, slower war. While those arguments echoed through politics, the Varn acted with clarity, sending a transmission to all nearby ships, translated not by words but by feeling, by pulses of thought and image. We remember the silence, and we choose not to return to it, and with that they formed a protective ring around the Titan's roar, not attacking but shielding it, proving their change was real, that they would not return to fear or destruction, no matter the provocation. Voss, watching it all unfold, felt something inside him shift, a quiet pride, mixed with deep sadness, because he knew peace always came at a cost, and though they had stopped a battle, they had also awakened forces no one could predict. Later that cycle, as the Alliance ships prepared to return home and the Solstice ran last checks before departure, a small Varn ship broke from the formation and approached slowly, sending a simple message. "One of us wishes to learn with you," and for the first time a single Varn craft docked gently with a human ship, its body reshaping slightly to fit the Solstice's airlock, not out of necessity, but out of respect. When the airlock opened, no being stepped through, only light, a soft golden orb that hovered silently, watching, listening, not as a soldier, but as a student. Vega greeted it without fear, and Voss simply nodded, understanding that the warship had not only chosen peace, it had chosen growth, and in doing so something entirely new had been born. As the Solstice prepared to leave the nebula, Voss sent one final message to the Alliance, to the Council, and to any who still doubted. We did not return to rule. We return to remember what it means to care for something greater than ourselves. And then, in the quiet of space, the Solstice turned and vanished into the stars, leaving behind no debris, no monuments, only the memory of a war that never truly happened, and the hope of something better rising from the ashes of forgotten machines. In the days that followed, the story of the Solstice spread, not as a tale of human power, but of human presence, and the strange ability humanity had always held to reach out not just with strength, but with empathy, to look into the eyes of what others called enemies and find instead a reflection of themselves. And far across the stars, and places untouched by war, Varn ships began to glow gold, one by one, not because they were told to, But because they chose to end the galaxy, once filled with fear, stood still, holding its breath, wondering what might come next now that the machines had found their voice, and that voice had spoken not in fire, but in peace.